Hey everybody, welcome back to the VMP Performance channel. I'm Justin, and today I want to talk with you about throttle bodies. In particular, our G series of throttle bodies for the 05 to 14 Mustang GT and Shelby GT500. So these throttle bodies go through a rigorous assembly, testing, calibration process when they are built, and they occasionally have problems. Customers reach out to us and say, I could not tune the throttle body, it threw a certain code, it does this, it does that. So we take these throttle bodies back in and run them through an inspection procedure that I'm going to show you right here. What makes this G-style throttle body unique is that it has dual electronics. The motor is actually over here on one side and the throttle position sensor is over here. Ford first came out with this design in 2005. It's kind of like a carryover from the old mechanical throttle body days, because you've got the motor over here where there would normally be a linkage, and you've got a TPS sensor over here where there would normally be a TPS sensor. This isn't just one TPS sensor, this is two. And that is for the IPC circuitry in the ECU to detect potential failures. So let's hook it up to the test bench and see what it does. This test bench is something we custom built at VMP. We've of course got ECUs from all generations of Mustangs over here to hook our throttle bodies up to and test them. I've got the TPS, hook up this. We've got a dummy pedal down here, and this is actually gonna actuate the throttle like you were in the car. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and power up the ECU. You're gonna hear the little key on test that the throttle body does. And it just kind of quickly cycles the blade a little bit open, then back to closed, and then it rests up against the spring. First, most basic test, does the motor work? Motor works good. This is important because once in a while, these motors will be defective or they will burn up. When you take them apart, you can actually smell burning. That is one of the reasons that the 163R series of throttle bodies includes a heatsink now standard. That just helps keep the temperatures down when you're driving around a lot, when you're idling, when your hood's closed. Not a big deal with a race application, but important for a street application. Now we're gonna get into the more important stuff. We've actually got our HP tuners data logger hooked up here to our ECU. You can see this over here. We got OBD2 ports and everything going on. I'm gonna start scanning. We're looking at a couple important parameters here. Remember earlier I said there were two throttle position sensors in here. One is a rising voltage, the other is a falling voltage. And the crossover point is very important. I'm gonna actuate the pedal. TPS drops to the appropriate level and rises to the appropriate level. They actually match. This is that crossover point that I was talking about. And the throttle angle is only 33 degrees. Fully open is 82, but the crossover point is not at 40, that's at 33. And this is just all part of the logic in the ECU that makes sure there's not a failure and you don't have a runaway car. At this point, this throttle body has passed our most basic tests. Every throttle body that gets sent back to VMP gets serialized. We record important information such as the original customer complaint, the results of the test procedure, who bought the throttle body, the part number, all that type of stuff. And this is basically to identify any repetitive problems and root out whether maybe this motor has a failure or a problem only when it gets hot, or some other type of anomaly that is just hard to pinpoint in a static situation like this test bench. I want to talk a little bit more about the TPS values. There are actually factory specified values. This is nothing proprietary to VMP. It is just something that is specified in the Ford service manual because these are Ford electronics. Nothing crazy going on here. This particular throttle body falls at 4.16 and 1.04 closed. If we check our reference values, it's pretty much right there, centered around the factory reference values. We go wide open throttle, 1.2 and 4.4, same thing. The factory gives you huge variances, almost half a volt. I wouldn't really go by that. Here's something that I want to get into a little bit more and explain how it works. There are two springs inside of this throttle body. There's a spring-loaded stop right here, and then there's also a return spring under this cover. The other spring, and this is what requires special calibration and tuning, is the stop spring. In the factory configuration, that spring stops the blade at a fully closed position, and this is something that's actually set and calibrated when the throttle body is built, and then it pushes it open a small amount. So what we have had to do with these big honking throttle bodies, we've had to put a softer spring in here so the motor can get control of this big blade and close it enough to maintain a desirable idle speed. This is what is called default angle in the tune. And we actually had to work with the tuning companies a couple years ago and have this tuning parameter added. If the computer sees less than 7 degrees, when you key on, it will automatically fail-safe the car. With this big throttle body, you have to change the default angle in the ECU to 0 degrees. And at that point, the computer's not going to fail-safe, not going to give you a problem. In HP tuners, that parameter is under airflow, electronic throttle, and then on the right side under failure, default angle, you set it to 0 degrees. Now, it's very important not to mess with any of the other parameters in the ECU because you still absolutely need the throttle body failure logic to work and shut the car down if there's a runaway throttle situation. If you're tuning your car with SCT, this is a parameter that is in the SCT software but requires a special value file to access. If the car ever had a Kenny Bell supercharger or a Kenny Bell tune in it, they also set this parameter to 0 with their big 168 throttle bodies. If the customer reported specific issues when the vehicle was hot, say when it had been running for 30 to 45 minutes, we would also put this throttle body on a vehicle here and try to replicate those issues. There is more that can happen in a dynamic situation like running a throttle body on a vehicle. Sometimes these returns and issues are caused by something as simple as a tuning parameter. Sometimes they're more complex. These electronics are just off-the-shelf for electronics. VMP doesn't make them, we simply use them on our throttle body, and they are sometimes imperfect. We will occasionally replace electronics or replace TPS sensors from intermittent issues. I hope you've learned a little bit about what goes into our VMP line of throttle bodies. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and I will see you next time.